Hello, everybody. So, yes, I'm a PM, product manager at Cloudflare, and my main area is web application firewall. Also been working with some of the latest products on protecting APIs, right? And today I'm going to talk about the importance, or let's say the shifting focus from more traditional web traffic to APIs. What is driving this, and what are some technologies we can deploy to protect APIs. So in let's say, a traditional world where we had just web applications running on our browsers, we were more like in the first scenario, right? So what's really is changing is that before, or still with a web application, the backend was the one in charge of retrieving data from a database, building a nice HTML page, and provide it to the browser where you could visualize that, right? So with APIs, what is changing is that the logic of the visualization of the processing the data is moving more towards the client, right? So think about your mobile app or even in your browser nowadays. And the connection between the client and the backend is done through APIs. So every API has the power to expose data that resides in the backend and really allows basically hackers and anyone with ill intentions to access directly data, and it becomes much more powerful and much more, create more harm if you want. So this is the shift in the situation. This is why APIs are different, and this is why we need to develop new solutions to protect APIs. And the reason why also existing solutions don't really work for APIs is because, well, the first thing is because it's traffic volume. So API has a huge amount of traffic. Again, mobile apps, IoT devices, those sort of things rely on APIs, and they send many more requests than traditional web application. And they are also often automated, right? So if you think about bots, sometimes API calls are indistinguishable by bot traffic. And so how do you really separate what is good from malicious traffic? And applications also are changing way faster than before. So there is a higher velocity in developing new features that can be deployed and pushed to the internet. Of course, there are also requirements about latency, making the application very faster than before. And Cloudflare has the advantage of being able to see a lot of the traffic of the internet. Right? So 32 million requests per second are processed by our edge, our infrastructure, and so we can see trends as they happen. So I was looking at data in December about the type of traffic we see, and it turns out that 54% of traffic, of HTTP traffic, is API. And it's not just the biggest share of our traffic, it's also growing very, very fast. On the right-hand side, you'll see the growth per traffic type. So you have API, media, web, text, and you see that API is growing 20% in 10 months. So it's almost twice as much as web. So sooner, very soon, we'll see that most of the traffic, or almost all traffic about application will be APIs. And if we see why this is happening, there is a component of industry. Also, there are certain industries that are driving this change. So if you think about banking, financial services, there is actually a shift in the industry, right? So there are many more challenger banks. There are initiatives like the open banking that they're defining how financial services and financial solutions are interacting on the internet and via APIs. And those changing are reflected in the type of traffic we see. Of course, retail, we have much more e-commerce, probably driven also by the pandemic. People are shopping more online. But even, well, in general, cryptocurrency, internet software, they look very like less of a growth, but they're still about 20% in 10 months. So we really see this shift. And as devices, I was mentioning, mobile devices, IoT are actually leading the charge. If you think about threats, we've talking a lot about threats in the talks before mine. When it comes to API, we have three major areas, right? So I'm dividing kind of three stripes here. So the first one is about authentication authorization. So are people that are accessing our service who they say they are. And then the second part is about data, accessing data, or perhaps leveraging vulnerabilities to, for example, SQL injections, injection of attacks, exposing data, or assign and change the data in your service, in your backend. And finally is about your resources. So sometimes attacks are just about trying to bring down your service by abusing it, or even leveraging what is called shadow APIs, so APIs you were not aware they were running on your service. Let me now jump a little bit more into the details of how we can protect APIs in the modern world. When we talk about solutions at Cloudflare, about securing APIs, I always, you can probably see this, but this is a funnel. I always bring up a funnel as an analogy, right? So at each step of the funnel, you're removing part of the threats. And this is an approach that works because you're basically having to process huge amount of data. So you have to have a solution that works at scale. So in this case, the first part is more about protecting from volumetric attacks. Think about DDoS attacks. The second one is more about protecting your attack surface, so understanding who's accessing your applications and making sure that they are accessing services that you are aware of, that you are in control, that you're still developing, and you're completely confident that they're not leaking information. And then it's about validating each request and avoiding like exploit. And finally, is about protecting the load of your application. So making sure that the volume of requests you receive are manageable. So I'll double click in a couple of them. So about volumetric protection, here the goal is about guaranteeing that the infrastructure is always up. So before we were talking about ransomware, right? And DDoS came up. I think this is something also we see a lot at Cloudflare. So a lot of customers come to us because they are under attack, under threat of ransomware and for DDoS. And so they ask us, can you protect us to avoid this threat? And one of the things we of course we provide is a huge network that has a lot of redundancy and doesn't compromise on performance. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. And of course you can also take other action to protect your application by removing a big chunk of traffic that you know is malicious, like traffic from VPNs or anonymizers or proxies. So if we talk again about the first part, is about the network. So to avoid being trapped into a DDoS attack, right? So what you can do is, of course, being behind a huge network that is has a global footprint. So, for example, Cloudflare has built this network with 250 data centers around the globe, very close to users, so less than 50 milliseconds from 95% of the internet connected world. And so having this network basically means that even if there is a DDoS attack, then you're going to be protected, and your application is going to be reachable. Another aspect of protecting APIs, as I was mentioning, is about authentication authorization. So making sure who is accessing the application is who they say they are, and they're not using, for example, compromised credential. So here I'm going to show you data we collected at our edge from one of our customers. So we have a product called Exposed Credential Check, where we basically validate, or we check whether a password and a username has been compromised somewhere on the internet. And then we basically identify when this happens. You can log, you can block, you can take any action you want. But here, I think the takeaway is that you can see, we're logging here when this happens, you can clearly see credential stuffing attacks as they happen, as they are targeting a specific application. And this is true for APIs or for any other type of application. So you see here there are 3 bursts. Here there is a botnet coming online at 1 p.m. And then for a couple of hours, they just try a number of stolen credentials and trying to break into accounts to steal personal identifiable information, credit card numbers, emails, you name it, right? So having the visibility on this allows you to react and deploy some security tools to block the ongoing attack. And of course, you could also notify your users that they should change their password because there's somewhere on the internet has been compromised. Another aspect, and I was mentioning, I'm going down the funnel, is about request validation. So we avoided or we prevented the DDoS volumetric attack. We have also made sure that who has logged into our application are valid users. Now is about protecting from possible malicious requests and attacks. And Web Application Firewall, of course, is a pretty established tool that does that, so identifies possible threats. In a way, think about a Web Application Firewall as a negative security model product. So you're looking for pattern of known attack vectors, like a SQLI, XSS, any vectors you know that can do some harm to your application. But there are also new tools that follow more like a positive security model, specifically designed for APIs. One of them is called schema validation. So with API, you have the definition of what good traffic looks like. And so you can use that to make sure that every request is validated against the schema. So making sure that the requests are valid and they don't carry any suspicious payload. Finally, the last one is about load and making sure the application can handle the number of requests that it receives. So some of the attacks are simply, well, as we said, DDoS, but also very targeted denial of service. So perhaps they target one of your endpoint and they try to send excessive number of requests, and then your server can't keep up, and then they bring down your infrastructure. One way to protect against this is, of course, to deploy solutions like rate limiting. Rate limiting is an old tool. Basically, you can define a rate of requests from each individual user, each individual device, to make sure that this is within a threshold you want. But of course, when it comes to API, things are evolving very fast, and so rate limiting is keeping up with that. So we have new solutions that allow you to count and to track devices in a much more granular and targeted way. And so this is something that, of course, for any API application would be worth exploring. And I think I'm here, the last slide. So I wanted just to wrap up and just the takeaways from this, I think, is that APIs are becoming more and more central in the internet. And of course, this is becoming also one of the most exploited protocol, if you want, from hackers and attackers. So this requires really to deploy new solutions and design new solutions from our side, but also deploy them for whoever has an application out there open to the internet. And when it comes to type of security, what we've seen working very well is to use a multi-layered approach where you deploy increasingly granular solutions that narrow down, or if you want to remove attacks as they come along. And with that, I think
so, Daniele.
Break time.
Super.
Right?
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.